Welcome and thanks for joining us. My guests today are Kyle Thomas. He is the industry lead for public sector at Appian, and Blake Templeman, the chief product officer at Groundswell. Good to have you both with us today.
Yeah, great to be here.
Good to be here.
All right, and Kyle, we're going to start with you. You have been on both the government and the industry sides. Give us what it looks like from a mission delivery standpoint, this regulatory landscape. And it's always shifting because regulations change and what we have as public purpose changes, but the mission itself technically is also evolving. Tell us what you know.
Sure. Well, thanks again, Tom, for having us today. Here in the United States, I think it's no secret, we have a fairly complex financial services market. And what that leads to is a fairly complex financial services regulatory space. The U.S. stands alone in that it has a combination of state and federal regulatory agencies looking after the financial services world. And many people point to that as a relative weakness. But I think there's a lot of strengths to that setup, and one of those is just the huge number of cops on the beat watching over the financial services world. So some of the things that I think I'm seeing with that large number of cops on the beat are the potential that we have to connect them all through systems and data. And I see that's a significant direction the industry is headed, a shift towards more connected regulatory structure and bringing them together through systems and data. Mm-hmm. There's big benefits to that. First, the benefits come to the consumer, greater consumer protection, less space for bad actors to cause harm. It's a more stable and more consistent business environment. It becomes more predictable when all the regulatory agencies are kind of moving together and working as one. And it helps the economy as a whole. You know, it kind of routes out those bad actors and it limits their ability to cause systemic harm. So I think that's something I'm seeing, a greater desire for these agencies to kind of work together, share information across agency lines and across state and federal lines in a way that we haven't seen before.
And among different regulatory agencies, especially at the federal level, they don't all totally overlap in their mission. Sometimes there's edges where they come together. And so given that the government is talking about customer experience for the regulated entities, having some kind of an integration would probably make it easier for them from a compliance standpoint and who do I call about this type of standpoint?
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. The industry itself is going through a lot of change. There's a lot of new types of financial service providers out there. Sometimes they fall in between the lines of regulatory agencies. And that overlap catches some and that overlap misses some others. And so that's certainly something that I know the agencies and state and federal partnerships are working to kind of close any of those gaps and really work hard to maximize the benefits of having those overlaps where they exist.
And maybe if two agencies are looking at the same phenomenon, for example, they could understand that, get earlier warning of that, because sometimes the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing in government, and thereby concentrate their efforts, maybe trim down the staff they need, and therefore get more with the same type of effort.
That's exactly right. Yep, what one agency learns about a company, rather than keeping that within that agency and that knowledge in that silo, by sharing that with other agencies, we learn a lot about the interdependencies and the interrelationships between the types of participants in this financial services market. It makes a better kind of 360-degree view the more information is shared, the more systems are collaborative, the more data that these agencies can kind of collectively access from one another. It just makes the whole system tighter and a better operating and better functioning system.
Okay, and Blake, good to have you with us today. You have experience with this in Groundswell working with the CSBS. Tell us about that, spell out the agency, and what kind of work did you see this kind of thing have success in?
Yeah, so the Conference for State Bank Supervisors is responsible for supporting and really representing in a way that streamlines, makes processes more efficient, and reduces burden on staff across all of the different state financial regulators. And so their goal is across many different industries. And what we worked with them on was specifically in the examination, investigations, and complaint space. So inherently, CSBS's goal is to make every state regulator's life easier through innovation and better. They didn't want to just kind of replicate the systems that they had. They wanted to kind of change the game completely. How do we really take it to the next level? So we worked with them to build a first of its kind system. I really like to start with the fact that it's a system of systems, because it's a system that is based on standards, but it is also a system that has to meet all of the different requirements of each of those state regulators to do their regulation. So that's one premise that was very different. It wasn't for one or a small group, it was actually to be used for all of them, to help them find standardization where possible, but give them flexibility to do things exactly the way they need to do them to meet their state regulatory guidance. In addition to that, it was also the first of its kind system where the regulators and the financial institutions were in the same system doing these financial examinations, investigations, and managing their complaints. So that in itself was completely innovative as well. And by a byproduct, to make sure any system is successful and to get as much buy-in through change management, CSBS also really has to service and support those financial institutions. So because we were going to bring them into the system had to be great for them as well. So we were able to establish a system, first of its kind. It was an opt-in system, and at this point, almost every state is using it for their bank or their financial institution examinations across all of the different financial institutions in the United States.
So it sounds almost like an environment in which everyone can operate but still have their own systems for whatever particular things they have, because I imagine the regulations vary from state to state, but yet there's almost like a law enforcement network in some ways.
It's a little bit like that. It's definitely like that, but it's really all contained in the system. It can integrate out to their systems as well. But a major component of this is the system is flexible enough that they can bring in their own policies, procedures, ways they're going to conduct the different examinations that they're doing. And they can do it in a way where they can do it individually, but what's really become kind of the new mantra is the idea of one financial institution, one exam. And it used to be that if you were doing business in 10 different states, over the course of a couple of years, you'd have each one of those states examine you. Now with this system, because it is a system of system and it is so flexible, the states can actually go together and the state regulators can examine one institution as a whole. That reduces burden on everyone. The states are able to bring best of breed resources to the exam. Instead of a whole team for all the different areas, they can bring their resources for certain areas and other states can bring resources for others. And then the institution loves it as well because instead of having 5 exams in a year, they have 1. So really that synergy is great and those interdependencies have been handled by such a flexible system.
I can imagine what the whiteboards must have looked like in those banks. Well, we've done Missouri, but we haven't gotten Kansas done yet, and this way it's kind of one fell swoop and you're done.
That's the long-term goal.
And a question, what about the vertical integration with, say, FDIC? Maybe not integration with FDIC, but is there a way that there's some kind of vertical look at this because the FDIC at the federal level is looking at the same institutions?
Yeah, and I think that really dives into not just the integration with the FDIC, but the value of building this on a low-code platform. What CSBS has been able to realize has now been transcendent. It has been used, and we're supporting at Groundswell almost a majority of the financial regulatories at the federal and the state level. So the FDIC, the SEC, the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, all of those state regulators using the system, Ginnie Mae. So they're all now leveraging this platform because it's been shown to be so flexible and because it's a low-code platform, so easy to build upon to your exact requirements. Not only are they all using it, but that just makes it so much easier to integrate with each other and share that information as well.
Interesting, yeah. So Kyle, that does get down into the workflow technical level to make this all happen. Describe some of how that works to us.
Yeah, sure. I'll start by just saying, I want to make sure we paint the picture that the people in this ecosystem, the regulatory agencies, state and federal, they have been working together for decades. Technology is finally the thing that's catching up. It was difficult to work together from a technology standpoint before because these platforms didn't integrate with each other well, the data sets didn't play with each other. So I think really that's what the folks over at CSBS have proven is possible, is that by putting a piece of technology between all these agencies, breaks down those barriers, and suddenly it becomes a lot easier to work together. So we're excited to see that on the state and federal side, as well as just within the states and within the federal agencies. The business to supervision, whatever you call it, supervision, regulation, is very workflow based, like you're saying. It's usually 2 parties at the table. There's the regulator, and then there's the regulated company. As Blake was saying, for the first time, we're seeing the ability to create systems that bring both of those parties into the same platform. That adds transparency like we've never had before. The companies know what they're going to get in a regulatory experience. They know where the regulation is, where the supervision activity is at, the timelines they can expect. So there's just some almost immediate benefits from a transparency standpoint. But I think beyond that, platforms like Appian have a real advantage here, because the regulation workflow is just craving or begging for advances like modern technology offers, such as artificial intelligence, machine learning, intelligent document processing. All these things now exist that didn't before, and I think are driving some of the appetite for these agencies to modernize their systems. Take, for example, intelligent document processing. Let's imagine you're an examiner and you have 10,000 loans to review at one of the biggest mortgage companies in America. You're never going to get through these loans. There's not enough people on your payroll to get through all these 10,000 loans. You can have a machine pull some of those data points off of those documents, feed that data into a model, and that model can spit out the 4 or 5 loans that a human being needs to actually review. And that's where technology just accelerates the progress that we've made from a regulatory standpoint almost immediately.
All right, I've got a lot of follow-up questions, but first we're going to take a short break. My guests today are Kyle Thomas, he's the industry lead for public sector at Appian, and Blake Templeman, the chief product officer at Groundswell. I'm your moderator, Tom Temin. This discussion is modernizing the financial regulatory environment, some lessons learned, sponsored by Appian here on Federal News Network.